And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Welcome to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I am Russell Brown. Joining me, as always, CP Christian Page. CP, you're under the weather, but how you doing, my man?
I'm getting better, a little better, but I took some cold medicine just a little bit ago, so if I start dozing off, no disrespect to you or the listeners.
Oh, it's all good. I'm losing my voice. I lost it on Sunday during my kids' football game, so I might be all over the place for my, vocal levels or whatever you want to call it. But let's jump right into it. Week 3 is in the books, and then we'll get into a matchup each for Week 4 and maybe a draft prospect that we're looking forward to. And then just through 2 weeks of the NFL, a rookie that has stood out so far, in our opinion. So let's jump into Week 3. The recap is here. I'll start. Florida, Kentucky was a game that I watched. I was very impressed with Van Jefferson, wide receiver number 12 for Florida. If you have not watched Van Jefferson, I would suggest doing so. He's a former Ole Miss recruit. He had committed there, played there, then he transferred to Florida, and really everywhere he's been, from Ole Miss to Florida, he's been relatively productive. Now, not overly productive or anything like that, but he's a player that I think just maybe is somebody that we look on into the future for maybe like day 2 or day 3 of the draft for 2020. He's a redshirt senior, 6'2", just around 200 pounds. I'm hoping we see him at the Senior Bowl, but he stood out in this game against Kentucky. Florida won 29-21, but they ended up losing Felipe Franks. That's probably the big news story coming out of that game is Felipe Franks done for the year. He's going to have ankle surgery, and some people would probably suggest, hey, that's going to hurt Van Jefferson, but that's actually the opposite. Kyle Trask came in as quarterback, and he threw 13 times, and out of his 13 pass attempts, 7 of those attempts were targeted to Van Jefferson. Jefferson brought in 6 receptions for just over 70 yards. So I think Van Jefferson could see maybe an increase in volume, an increase in production, and I think he could be a player that maybe moves up draft boards as we move forward through the draft process. So that's one player for me in the games that I watched. I know you definitely watch football on Saturday. What's a player or a matchup that stood out for you?
Yeah, we talked about it just a little bit last Thursday when we were previewing the games, but Clemson versus Syracuse, the game, 41-6, Clemson, the victor there. No surprise there. But Tee Higgins just went off. 7 catches, 150 yards, and I know he had a 58 long in this game, so that kind of escalated some of his production, but that's still 92 yards off 6 receptions. So he showed his overall ability, showed his speed, his quickness, and I've commented in the past, I don't think he's the cleanest route runner, but I'm slowly seeing those little subtleties and the improvement in his overall route running ability to get open, to stretch the field, to make things happen over the middle, and you're seeing a little bit more rapport with him outside of some of those other very talented receivers at Clemson, Ross and Rogers. He's gaining that rapport with Trevor Lawrence, and I think Clemson kind of showed their true colors in this game, and that's a positive because we were kind of waiting for what happens, after, week 2 against 2 okay opponents, a conference game to start the season versus Georgia Tech, and then Texas A&M, a game that they saw some struggles with, but Texas A&M is still a decent team top to bottom. So I think Clemson showed their true colors, and I think this looked the most Clemson they have all season long. Tee Higgins was a big part of that, the big wide receiver.
Yeah, I like Tee Higgins a lot. Everybody knows that. It definitely makes me scratch my head on what Syracuse is as a football team. 2 bad losses in a row. And then it makes me wonder what the hell's going on with Maryland, because they beat up on Syracuse and then they lost 20-17 to Temple. So very odd week for two teams that we've been very confused about through the early going of the regular season for college football. That's in Syracuse and Maryland. But the other team that I watched and the other game that I watched was Penn State versus Pittsburgh. There was a big delay in this game. Fortunately, I didn't watch it live. I watched it the next night on Sunday night. And I'll tell you this, Journey Brown from Penn State stood out to me. And I had to really do some research on him, and I was very pleased with the research that I saw. Journey Brown, a redshirt sophomore running back, so he is draft eligible. And for most of you that probably listen to this podcast or follow the NFL draft, know that Penn State has had two very talented running backs in the last 2 years, Saquon Barkley being one of them, and Miles Sanders last year, who was a second-round pick, was selected 53rd overall by the Philadelphia Eagles. So Journey Brown, this is a guy that has big shoes to fill. There's no doubt about it. But as Penn State enters Big Ten play, he's a player to watch. He had 10 carries for over 100 yards against Pitt. He's not seen the exact volume that you would want to see out of a starting running back in the early going, but 21 carries for 175 yards, over 8 yards per carry for him. This is one of the, I think, fastest players in the country. I don't know if he's Henry Ruggs fast, but he ran the 60-meter dash, the fastest in the state of Pennsylvania history, and then he ran it 10th fastest in the country when he was in high school. He ran the 60-meter dash in just over 6.8 seconds. So he's just a freak athlete. I wrote an article about him last night. Van Jefferson was in there. And I know I wrote about Journey Brown, and I know the play that I had in there was him being caught from behind. He got chased down. But, again, he ran like 70 yards, and he actually ended up hurting his left knee in this game. So I don't know if exactly when he hurt the knee, but that was part of maybe the reason why he got caught from behind. But either way, I'm a big fan of Journey Brown. So if you guys have not watched him, pay attention to him in a running back group that I think is pretty good. But maybe he's a player, again, like Van Jefferson, we talk about in the second or a third day of the draft if they both declare and everything goes well for them. So those are my two guys. Those were the two games that I really watched closely. Do you have a second game or a couple of other prospects on your mind?
Yeah, I guess a game and a certain player. I'm going to go the wide receiver route. Michael Pittman, the big wide receiver from USC, in the game, even in loss to BYU in overtime, 27-30, still caught 9 balls, 95 yards, and a couple touchdowns. And he's not this dynamic athlete or anything like that. I kind of liken him to Colin Johnson. You know, he's going to have a lot of production. He's going to have a lot of those red zone targets and, routes that are within 15 yards. But he's just a reliable pass catcher that really helps USC kind of bridge from JT Daniels to the next guy and kind of has that safety blanket. Along with Tyler Vaughns, too. They're two special wide receivers for USC. So you hope their maximum potential is there for USC going forward. But at 6'4", 220 pounds, I really like what Pittman's doing so far. He has already 21 catches, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the season. And I circled this because Friday's matchup, if we want to segue into this weekend's matchups, Friday's matchup, they host number 10 Utah. We talk about Utah's defense, they being USC. We talk about Utah's defense being one of the toughest in all of college football. Big circle matchup here. I don't know if Jalen Johnson, the cornerback from Utah, is going to cover more of Tyler Vaughns or Michael Pittman of USC. But if we see Johnson versus Pittman there on the outside, you're going to talk about one of the most physical matchups in all of college football this season. And yes, it happens at the wide receiver and cornerback position, not the offensive line and defensive line. I'm really interested in seeing this because neither guy is overly dynamic in his lower half, but they both like to play physical. Jalen Johnson, he's going to draw some flags in the league. He's drawing flags now based on his hands-on style of play. But I think this is a really fun matchup to watch from a scouting perspective this Friday night.
I'm excited for that one. I'm going to a high school football game on Friday night, but I'm really hoping the game is one-sided so I can kind of head out before the fourth quarter even begins, and then I can go watch this game because, as we all know, I'm very much on board with the Utes this year, and I think partially that Utah this could almost be like a trap game in a way for Utah because, like you mentioned, Michael Pittman, Tyler Vaughns, very talented receivers at USC. But yeah, no, Pittman's. I'm a big fan of him as well. I think he's really taken the proper steps. But yeah, that's week 3. I don't think we need to go in a bunch of scores and any upsets or anything like that. I could be here for a whole hour in itself talking about Michigan State, but I won't do that. But I do want to talk about week 4, college football. I can't believe we're basically a third of the way through the regular season now as we enter the third of the season or whatever. But week 4, we're here. I want to focus on a matchup. Each of us focus on a matchup that we're looking forward to with the draft prospect. Again, I'll start here on this one. I'll start Boise State Air Force. I know this one's a little different, but I'm going to the defensive side of the football, and I want everybody to pay attention to edge rusher Curtis Weaver from Boise State, 6'3", 265. He's a junior. He's already got 6 sacks on the year. Now, it's unlikely for him to have a ton of sacks or pressures in this game against Air Force because of the wing tee that Air Force runs and that Air Force Army that they have. But overall, I think this is a good game for Curtis Weaver to show what he can do against the run, how he can handle at the point of attack. And again, there will be a few opportunities for him to rush the passer. So will he capitalize on those few opportunities? I think he can. I think he's actually, even though he's listed at 6'3", I think he's got some decent length for that height. It's not ideal, but again, very similar to Derek Barnett in size and length and everything else. So hopefully he puts everything together as a pass rusher for the entire season. But overall, I think Curtis Weaver is a player that we're going to talk about a hell of a lot more during the regular season, especially when you look at the numbers already. 15 tackles on the year, 6 sacks. 2 years prior to that, he's had over 20 sacks in his career. He's on pace for a career year right now for the Broncos. So I like Curtis Weaver a ton for week 4 against Air Force. So that's my guy. Who's your guy for week 4?
Yeah, I'm going to go with kind of a sleeper in the sense in the Tennessee at Florida matchup. Of course, this isn't a sexy matchup as we would hope to be. Tennessee kind of course, blew that, losing to Georgia State and BYU. Turned the corner, I guess you could say, against Chattanooga, beating them 45-0 last week. But the players seemed a little more excited. They seemed a little more engaged. So maybe in a sense, in true Florida fashion, this game might actually be a little closer. And then, you're breaking in a new quarterback. You talked about Kyle Trask just a few minutes ago. You like his development so far, but you never know. First start and one of the better rivalry games, or at least should be in college football, at least in the SEC. But I'm going to go with Florida cornerback, not C.J. Anderson, but Marco Wilson, the redshirt sophomore, 6 foot, 190 pounds. I was watching him a little bit today versus Miami. He loves to play that physical style of game. And I think this matchup pairs perfectly with Jawan Jennings, the bigger wide receiver from Tennessee, who this season has 12 catches, 208 yards, and 4 touchdowns already to this point. So I think we're going to see kind of that perimeter matchup between these two guys. I don't think it's going to be as physical of Michael Pittman of USC and Jalen Johnson, the corner of Utah, as I talked about a couple minutes ago. But I still think you're going to see a very physical matchup there to the point where this could be kind of a difference maker because Jennings is shown to be Tennessee quarterback Jarrett Guarantano's go-to guy. So if that's taken away, I think that's definitely a check mark for Marco Wilson. But he just plays with his hair on fire. He's always engaged, which I think is a big question mark for C.J. Henderson on the other end because it seems like he's not always enthusiastic of doing certain things when he doesn't have a matchup on his side of the field or if he has to go in and get his nose dirty in the run game. You're going to see Marco Wilson fighting and stacking and shedding off certain blocks. You're going to see him make plays on the football. And with his long ability, you're going to see him play a physical style of game. So he's kind of I don't want to say an underrated guy because he does have some height, but cornerback for Florida, number 3, Marco Wilson. I think this is a big game for him, even though not as many eyes are going to be on this game as we thought maybe going into the season. But I definitely think he could come out as a big winner as far as draft buzz goes this weekend.
I'm excited for that game. I don't like Tennessee at all, but I do like the pick that you got there. I would also, tell people to – I think we've mentioned him many times before, but LaMichael Pirine, definitely a name to pay attention to on the offensive side. Like you mentioned, Kyle Trask getting the start. That might also help, Van Jefferson certainly, but LaMichael Pirine as well, who, they might lean on a little bit to help this team, especially running the football. He's their leading carrier right now, 35 carries for 120. But the big thing is he's catching passes out of the backfield too. He's got 12 receptions on the season already, and that's tied with Van Jefferson. So I think Van Jefferson and LaMichael Pirine are going to see an uptick in volume and everything else. And I think, again, it's going to help them as far as draft value, workload, everything else. So I'm excited for Florida and their offense with what they've got, and like you mentioned, some of their defensive players as well. So that's really the week 4 breakdown. I don't want to go into crazy detail. We'll have a much more, I think, detailed week 4 recap. We do have Michigan, Wisconsin, and everything else this weekend. But again, I really want to play this weekend by ear. I don't want to jump into anything too crazy and come out with some like weird assessment and say, oh, this guy's top-notch player, and then we look back at the tape and he's really not. So I want us to tread carefully and do what we're doing, because I think we're right on par with what we're doing. But let's jump into the NFL. Let's talk about some rookies that are on par with what they're doing. And Terry McLaurin is the guy that I've got through 2 weeks. I think he's been doing a phenomenal job. We talked so highly of him from the Senior Bowl, and he was a guy that I was just a big fan of, everything with him working with the Raiders coaching staff. He now goes to Washington. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2019. He goes to Washington. He's essentially now their number 1 receiver, and he's doing this with Case Keenum. He's not even doing it with Dwayne Haskins, his former teammate at Ohio State. But just through 2 weeks, McLaurin, 10 receptions, 187 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's already seen 16 targets. So he is getting true workload of a number 1 receiver in Washington. And with the injury to Darius Geis, and as he's being shut down for the season, they're relying on Chris Thompson, Adrian Peterson. But this is a team that just does not have it together on the offensive line in Washington. So they're constantly falling behind. Their defense isn't anything spectacular. So, again, they're falling behind there as well. So from just playing from behind, Terry McLaurin is getting a ton of work, a ton of volume, and I think he's been impressive all the way across the field. He had an impressive preseason. So just through 2 weeks, I think Terry McLaurin, a big rookie standout so far. Who's the guy that you got?
I didn't intend for this to be a heavy wide receiver podcast, but it looks like we're going that direction. So I'm going to go with Hollywood Brown for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
He's only played 42% of the snaps, which is 65 total plays. But during those 65 snaps, he has 18 targets, 12 catches, 233 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So even though he hasn't been on the field that much, which, I mean, you could say, split down the middle, 32, 33 plays a game for a rookie wide receiver, that's pretty solid, even if you are the first-round pick for your select team. But I think Hollywood Brown has just gained an obvious rapport with Lamar Jackson. Same with Mark Andrews. We're talking about young guys. I mean, Mark Andrews, back-to-back 100 games and 100-yard games, and I think he scored at least 1 touchdown in both. So it's really fun to see all this potential come out for Baltimore. Hollywood Brown, a rookie, Mark Andrews, a second-year player, and then Lamar Jackson, we know his story. So it's really cool to see kind of Baltimore's plan kind of just unfold in front of them. I'm not going to get way ahead of myself. It's only 2 games. They haven't played the greatest of opponents. I get that. But still, it's fun just to see how Hollywood Brown can evolve in this offense, especially when I don't say there was a ton of people that didn't necessarily agree with him being a first-round pick, but there were some, hesitations, I guess you could say, for him going that high in the draft. But I definitely like what I see of him. But there's been a lot of solid rookie wide receivers. DK Metcalf coming off that, I guess knee scope it was. I can't really remember the exact diagnosis, and he's turned into a solid player for Seattle so far. Deebo Samuel has 8 catches and 1 touchdown. TJ Hawkinson, just from a receiving standpoint, he had a really solid first week. He only caught 1 pass last week, but it's nice just to see the involvement of these young wide receivers. A.J. Brown, another one from the Titans. So we talked last year that it was a pretty solid wide receiver class, maybe not so much top-heavy as it was from a depth reason. But I remember us talking last year, I guess a few weeks maybe before the draft, we were talking about how, I guess on surface, this wide receiver class doesn't look great when you're talking about grading guys, in the top maybe 25. But later on, we're going to come back and be like, this was a solid class top to bottom, just based on the contributions that you'll see down the line. I think we're getting a lot of those answers right now, and we're only going into week 3.
Yeah, for sure. And Terry McLaurin did something that hasn't been done since Calvin Johnson did it in 2007. He's the first rookie receiver since Calvin Johnson to have consecutive 60-plus yard receiving games and 1 touchdown in each of those games. So his first 2 career games are almost similar to Calvin Johnson. So it's a little crazy to say. Maybe that's just a little too far on the stat column, but overall, I think McLaurin's been really great. I think all the wide receivers that you talked about have been great. 2 running backs as well. Devin Singletary not getting a ton of volume as far as carries with the Buffalo Bills, but he's been impressive as well. He's battling a hamstring injury right now, but he had his first career touchdown on Sunday. I believe he's averaging like 8 yards a carry or something like that, 9 yards a carry. I can't remember exactly. And then Josh Jacobs as well for Oakland. He's nursing a groin injury, but he's also been very impressive. He had over 100 scrimmage yards in his first game, and he was the first rookie running back to do that since LaDainian Tomlinson. So a ton of rookies that have really just stepped up in a big way. Kyler Murray, I thought, looked relatively good. I thought he looked better in week 2 than he did week 1 outside of that fourth quarter against the Lions, but I digress. So, no, there's a lot of moving parts right now in the NFL with rookies. Daniel Jones getting his first start this Sunday against Tampa Bay. I think tomorrow I'll be doing a show, and I think I'll be talking about that a little bit more into detail. I'm excited about that for him, but at the same time, I'm definitely nervous because the New York Giants are very bad. So we'll see what happens. But CP, do you have anything else between week 3 of college football, week 4 of college football, or week 3 of the NFL?
Yeah, we were talking about just matchups versus matchups from a player and scouting perspective. Notre Dame traveling to Athens, Georgia this week for 7 versus number 3. 2 guys that one guy that you really like, one guy that we both like, Julian Okwara and Andrew Thomas. I think that's one of the better scouting matchups you may see all year. Julian Okwara, we're going to see what his secondary pass plan is because Andrew Thomas does a great job of getting extension, of staying in front and mirroring that pass rusher. So we have to see what Okwara can do to counter that and threaten Jake Fromm in the pocket. And then with Andrew Thomas, he has a solid kick slide. It can be a little choppy at times, but he needs to, maybe get that extension out a little quicker because Okwara has that NFL length that he can, if you don't react quick enough, he can get on your numbers and he can control you. So I think there's a couple things here. I think Andrew Thomas obviously is the better prospect here. But if Julian Okwara can find ways to threaten the pocket and pressure Jake Fromm, because we all know how Jake Fromm can react to pressure, then I think Okwara can gain some major brownie points to the point where, you may be looking at him more as maybe solidifying a round 1 guy. I'm not 100% sold on that yet, but I think this will definitely, check the box if he can consistently get to the quarterback. This is also going to be one of those games where don't necessarily just look at the box score because Okwara can still gain those quarterback pressures or still threaten in the run and pass game, even though he's not getting the sack or the tackle for loss. So that's definitely a matchup to pay attention to this weekend in college football.
Yeah, for sure. That's a no doubt, no question, must-watch Saturday night. Can't wait to watch that game. Just sit back, relax, watch that game. It's weird. Okwara only has 1 sack on the year, which is odd. But Jake Fromm quietly has been off to a very nice start to start the year. 42 of 56, that's 75% of his passes. Just over 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's looked pretty good. Now, I know 2 of those games, Murray State, Arkansas State. So this is a big test against Notre Dame. I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table. I love that you mentioned Andrew Thomas, as also DeAndre Swift's another name as well. So there's quite a few players all the way from the offense to the defense for both teams. Notre Dame, Georgia, no doubt about it. So you guys can, of course, smash the follow button on Twitter @_Christian Page. That's PAGE @Russ NFL Draft. That's for me. Smash the follow button. And then just please do us a favor. Go to Spreaker.com. Go to iTunes. However you go about listening to your podcast. Search Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. You'll find us. Subscribe to the show. Rate the show. Leave us comments. Give us 5-star reviews. Either way, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And the more subscriptions we get, the more ratings we get, the more episodes of the show that we can do. And the best part for you is that it's free. It's free content all the time. So do that today. do not hesitate. And again, of course, smash the follow button on Twitter. So CP, I hope you feel better, my man. Thank you for joining me. I know you've been toughing it out, drinking the medicine. So go get some sleep, and we will talk again soon. And for myself, for CP, until next time, this is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.